I am Steve Kossor. I am a psychologist licensed in Pennsylvania in 1981. Been practicing psychology here for close to 40 years. Started in 1977. So in any case, I am also a certified school psychologist, and I started doing what we call wraparound services as my life's work about 30 years ago. What I'd like to talk to you about is how to get and keep insurance funding for necessary treatment. And in the course of the presentation, I'm going to be talking about primarily Medicaid, because Medicaid funds treatment for children from birth to the age of 21. The day they turn 21, they're no longer eligible for Medicaid-funded treatment under the EPSDT mandate. I'll be explaining what that mandate refers to, and basically what I think you'll realize is that EPSDT is a terrific funding source that is available for the treatment of auditory disabilities, vision problems, you name it, dental problems, as well as behavioral health problems. I'm going to show you a means of getting and keeping insurance funding that I created about 20 years ago and have been using for the last 20 years to capture and keep Medicaid funding for the treatment of children to the tune of 20, 30, 35, and even more hours of intensive individualized treatment every week, year-round, for years. Literally until the child's treatment program is finished successfully. Some people are incredulous about that because the public relations arm of the state and some of the county governments are that nobody gets more than a year, 2 at the most, 3 at the absolute outside of EPSDT funding. It's meant to be time limited. It's 6 to 10 hours a week. None of those things are true. And in fact, if you argue persuasively, you can get Medicaid managed care companies to authorize treatment exactly the way I've been doing it. I've been using the system I'm going to describe to you for about 20 years and refining it and perfecting it over time. You know, in a lot of ways, the insurance companies, the state, the county, they all make barriers. And I figured out how to make bridges. So I want to show you guys how to make bridges from one side of the aisle to the other, from no funding over here to funding that is sufficient in amount, duration, and scope to reasonably achieve the aims of the prescription. I am recording this, so if you say something, you'll be on tape. I record most, if not all, of the presentations I give, and I put them up on YouTube, because I really am interested in getting this word out. It is the truth. It is my lived experience for 30 years, and I'd like to leave it behind so that other people can get levels of care that I've been able to obtain for the clients that I serve. I'm also trying to disseminate this knowledge among other practitioners, because the treatment outcome measurement system I developed is applicable to podiatry or any other clinical service that you can monitor progress on a regular basis, very conveniently, collect data using a special scale that I created that uses interval data, and then apply those data to the process of proving that the treatment program is having a statistically significant impact on the behavior of the child or the condition of the patient, if you will, and that because the impact is statistically significant, then you can say that because the treatment is not yet finished and it is working, under the Medicaid Act, if the child is under 21, their treatment funding has to be continued until it's not necessary anymore. So that's the foundation within which we're working. All right, so the question now is, how do you create a measurement system that allows you to do very sophisticated analysis of variance or other statistical measures that literally prove with a high degree of reliability and validity that the treatment that has been rendered has had a statistically significant impact and literally helped the child definitively, chapter and verse. There's no argument, there's no opinion. It's statistically significant. Well, here's how you do it. There are two measures of assessment. One is called criterion referenced, and the other is called norm referenced. Criterion reference testing is like your old high school history teacher who wrote up a test measuring your ability to learn the material that she presented to the class from her own notes. So it is an individualized assessment that is given to every child in the class, measuring that child's learning of the material that the teacher herself presented. That's criterion referenced testing. Norm reference testing is the one everybody thinks about when they think about testing. This is the Kossor Scales, IQ tests, where somebody else, some psychologist usually, developed a measurement system, administered it to thousands of children in all walks of life all over the country, and collected information about how those children learned the material that the test is measuring. And then you compare the children in Mrs. Jones' class with this norm reference, normative sample, and you can compare those kids and how they progressed with the kids in Miss Jones' class. And in that way you can compare Miss Jones' kids with the norm sample, and you can say whether or not they are significantly better, significantly worse, or about the same. So that you have those two means of measurement that are widely understood throughout the world, really. Unfortunately, insurance companies have promoted a myth that only norm-referenced measures matter, and that's not true. In fact, criterion reference measurements have existed for hundreds of years. Back in the early days of statistics, when farmers would plant different varieties of seeds, they would measure which seeds grew faster, which ones lasted longer, and that's called a single subject with repeated measures experimental design. It's a very well established part of the scientific literature. Well, what I did is I applied standard procedures that are widely used in academics with the single subject with repeated measures experimental design standard with a treatment outcome measurement scale that uses interval data. Now, let me clarify what that means. There are varieties of data that you can collect. You can collect nominal data, which is simply a frequency count. How many times did it happen? And then you can collect ordinal data, where you rate things in terms of always, sometimes, never, and you have a vague continuum. But then there is interval data. See, with nominal and ordinal data, all you can really say is, well, we think there's a relationship, we're not sure, we can't make anything definitive, because the data isn't rigorous enough. But once you get into the realm of interval data, which means they're in this interval, they're not in this interval, they're not in that interval, they are here and only here. And if you can establish a means of measuring somebody that says they're here and only here and not here and not here, and you have a continuum of 10 different heres, and you ask that parent to give you feedback about their child's behavior every week, again and again and again, you are creating a single subject with repeated measures, experimental design, and if you use an interval scale of measurement, you can say at the end of the assessment period, even if it's only 12 weeks long, there is statistically significant evidence that the child's treatment program has had an effect, a positive effect if the kid got better, a negative effect if the kid got worse, higher than the probability of chance. Once you can say that, you have a greater than chance probability of treatment effect, you can say that my treatment program caused those improvements. So those are the two measurements. Let's go on to it a little further. I talked about a single subject with repeated measures design that uses interval data to make reliable, valid statements about the effect of the treatment program. That's the goal. If we can accomplish that goal, we can literally say to an insurance company, this child received a treatment program that had a statistically significant impact on their behavior. In fact, they got better. And not due to chance, absolutely statistically significant, because we measured it with an interval scale and we have an internally consistent measurement system, a single subject with repeated measures experimental design. Let me do a short shout out to the Institute for Behavior Change. This is the organization I created back in 1996. I've been doing this and billing Medicaid in Pennsylvania since that time. And you can go to this website, there's the designation for it in blue at the bottom. Log on, there's a load of stuff there that's free. So check out the Institute for Behavior Change as a resource for ideas about treatment funding for children under the age of 21 who qualify for Medicaid benefits. I just wanted to introduce this. This is not an endorsement. The CMS does not endorse anything or anybody, but it is an acknowledgement. I've been sending my stuff to Washington, to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, for decades. And when I send stuff out to them, I sometimes get an acknowledgement back, but this is a letter that my then congressman got when I volunteered to join a work group they were creating. It said basically, we agree that Mr. Kossor has a great deal of expertise and is a passionate supporter of EPSDT. So it's not an endorsement, but it's an acknowledgement that I'm actually a legit authority. EPSDT was created in 1967. It's part of the Social Security Act. It's a civil right, in fact, under the 14th Amendment, equal protection under the law, that allows children to get funding for treatment for all of these things. And not just treatment, but prevention as well. Physical, speech, and related therapies, hearing services, eye examinations and eyeglasses, durable medical equipment, home, residential, and inpatient care, dental care, and other services, including mental health care. That's what EPSDT pays for. Now wait for it, there's even more. If a service is medically necessary, and I'll show you how to certify that, then that service, treatment, whatever, has to be funded for a child who is enrolled in Medicaid through the EPSDT system, wait for it, since 1989, whether or not it is funded by any other plan. It doesn't matter if it's funded by the state education system. And wait for this, Medicaid is actually the payer of first resort for covered services in a school. You don't have to beg, borrow, and steal to get funding for those services that I showed you. You don't have to wait and try to figure out how to get money for it from the kid's private insurance or the school or a bake sale or any of that nonsense. And schools are all enrolled in the EPSDT system. They can literally bill the federal government for these services, get paid for them without tapping anything related to the school budget. Every single child who has an IEP, bingo, they're qualified and enrolled in Medicaid. Every single child with an IEP. So once they have a medically necessary treatment need, if it is prescribed correctly and delivered correctly, you take treatment outcome measurement, not just from the treatment provider. You have to get it from a reliable source. Frankly, children are not a reliable source for their own treatment outcomes. Their parents, on the other hand, are. I have yet to find an insurance company that will publicly say, well, the parent's lying. They're just making it up. Their kid doesn't really need these services. They won't do that. That's an invitation to a slander or libel suit, and they won't do it. So knowing that about insurance companies, what are we dealing with? They build barriers that minimize their costs. That's how they make a living. They charge premiums and then they give out as little as they possibly can, and the rest is called profit. That's insurance. So how do you put Medicaid into that system? You have to really keep it on the down low, because once you realize how easy it is to tell a federal judge, Your Honor, here's the law, please tell those people where to sign the check. It's a no-brainer. You can't do it arrogantly, because then you get slapped back. But if you do it professionally and politely and consistently, you get authorizations to deliver treatment to the extent that it is necessary, not to the extent that the insurance company or the state or the county or somebody else looking at dollars would prefer you to accept. And in fact, they tell parents all the time, be thankful you got it, it's free. What do you expect for nothing? Which is just, it's heinous. Parents are entitled to treatment services for their disabled children under the EPSDT mandate of the Medicaid Act since 1967. Okay, so how do we finesse the system and make them do what they're legally obligated to do? The treatment has to be evidence-based. You have to collect outcome data weekly. You want to use a problem-solving emphasis, not just chase behavior. You can think of behavior as like marbles rolling around on a cafeteria tray. They can collect them and herd them like herding cats or something. And then at the end of the day, maybe they've taken a couple marbles off the tray and now the kid doesn't qualify for treatment anymore. I've got a better idea. It's called the quantum theory of behavior. How about this? A child's a tray, and their tray is moving through life. Underneath the tray is stuff that they are being supported by, their culture, their endowment genetically, their familial patterns, siblings, all the stuff that goes into who they are. That's what their tray is sitting on. And that stuff causes behavior to pop into existence on the tray. Anybody who knows anything about behavior knows immediately it has multiple determinants. It's not one thing that caused it. That concept of a functional behavior analysis, that you're going to find the one function that behavior is caused, stop. We don't know what causes behavior. It's multiply determined. And when it pops into existence, we want to look at, okay, why? And when you look at it, you're not looking at what's rolling around on the tray. You're looking at what caused it to pop into existence. Those are the legitimate foci for treatment, not chasing the behavior. Because what happens if you're trying to lead somebody from behind? That's like telling them how to get to the airport every time they make a mistake. They'll never get there. You have to get in front of them and lead them. And the way to do that is to have a robust understanding of all of the things that go into their behavioral experience. Look, the bottom line is, as we learn and grow as human beings, we have a bigger understanding of how complicated things are. Anytime you're following a course that's like looking through a straw, you're making a mistake. You're deluding yourself that you're on the trail of a great realization. I mean, you may have to narrow your focus from time to time and focus on a small area of functioning within a greater range. But if you ever lose sight of the idea of what you're doing, that you're artificially narrowing your focus, you're making a terrible mistake. You're making a delusion that you're proceeding down a path that could conceivably result in a broadly applicable solution. If you lose sight of the fact that your attempt to find a single solution for a multi-determined problem, if you lose sight of the fact that that process is artificial, and you begin to believe that you have a solution, you can get way off on a crazy track, like saying that vaccinations cause autism. Well, they do in some cases. There's no question about that. But so do environmental pollutants, so does genetic endowments. Lots of stuff causes autism. But you get into you paint yourself into a corner when you put all your money on black, or 23. We're not playing roulette. We're doing science, right? We're not trying to win and get the prize. Stop it. You're trying to have a more robust understanding of what life is. So ABA, Applied Behavior Analysis, wait for it. What is applied behavior analysis? The answer to that is, it's whatever you're told it is. Because there is an answer for that, what it is, depending on who you are, who you talk to. If you talk to some people who advocated for ABA, it involves toileting, dressing, feeding. I actually had an insurance company authority say, you need to create outcomes of social significance in order to get funding for this child's treatment, like helping him order meals at a restaurant. No, I don't. I don't have to do that at all. Well, then we're not going to fund it. Please put it in writing. Spell my name right, that you will never pay for treatment unless it is aimed at teaching him how to order meals at a restaurant. You know what I do with that right statement in writing?
Yeah, what do you do?
I take it to the Medicaid insurance company and say, look, I tried to get them to pay for it. They wouldn't. It's in writing. Now you have to pay for it. And they do. As long as you attempt to get it funded by the private insurance world, you don't have to fail. You don't have to succeed. It doesn't matter what they say, think, or do. If they'll fund it, great. Send the bill to them. If they say no, put it in writing, and we'll send the bill to the Medicaid company, and they'll pay it.
So you have to be in the Medicaid database, though, for that to happen?
Yeah. Here's the bottom line. If you're a practitioner of mental health treatment services, you can enroll in Medicaid. I'm a psychologist. I'm a Medicaid enrolled provider in Pennsylvania. You can enroll as a Medicaid provider in Pennsylvania if you're a licensed clinical social worker, a licensed professional counselor, a marriage and family therapist, and all of those people have the ability now by state law to prescribe Medicaid-funded, EPSDT-funded treatment. It's a beautiful way of making a living because I have lots of newly credentialed professionals who are learning about Medicaid funding that they would never learn about anywhere else. I'm also a certified school psychologist, so I can wax philosophic about educational law and those kinds of things. So they learn about all of these other things. And my brother's a research pharmacist with more letters after his name than he's got in his name. And he and I like each other, so he tells me about neurobiological stuff that just will curl your hair about the world we live in. So you bring all of that knowledge into a child's life, and in about a half an hour you can say, okay, he probably has autism, looks like he's got a developmental disorder, looks like there may be a neurological atypicality going on here, etc., etc., and you can prescribe a treatment program that addresses all of those things, and it's all funded under EPSDT. Medicaid, right. Couple of important things to take note of. CMS is the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. That is the federal part of the Medicaid partnership. Medicaid is a partnership between federal and state authorities. Now the truth is, in order to get Medicaid money, the state has to write a Medicaid plan that defines what is medically necessary in that state. And then they send it to Washington, and Washington says, all right, we agree, that's good, here's your money. And I swear to God, within seconds of getting that money, before the ink's dry on the check, the state's doing stuff to submerge or, you know, divert, hide Medicaid money. This is why some organizations went nuts and lobbied vigorously to have laws passed all over the country to force private insurance companies to fund autism treatment. Wait a minute. Medicaid funded autism treatment since 1967 with no cap on the amount available. Every single state that passed an autism mandate has a cap. Pennsylvania, it's $36,000 a year. If you have a vigorous treatment program for a kid with autism with all of the pieces that it's needed, $36,000 is enough to fund it for a quarter, not a year. And it was all funded under Medicaid until the insurance law was passed. It's called Act 62 in Pennsylvania, and everybody clamored for it as if it was necessary. What they literally...
Do you remember?
Huh?
What year was Act 62? Do you remember?
2004.
Okay.
I don't remember exactly, but Act 62 was promoted among the advocacy committee as the answer to a prayer for parents who wanted treatment for their children. What their parents should have been told is that they have access to an unlimited, it's like a credit card with an unlimited balance.
So now they can't do that.
You have to exhaust your private insurance funds first, and then you can tap Medicaid. That's true. The problem is that everybody talks about we have private insurance funding now under Act 62, and that's when they stop talking about it, as if that's all you got now. It replaces Medicaid. No, it doesn't. It doesn't replace it. But it does now step in front of it and makes the private insurer the payer of first resort. Let me explain how they get railroaded out of Medicaid. You have to reapply for Medicaid no less than annually. You get a letter in the mail saying, would you like to re-continue your Medicaid enrollment for Eddie? And if you don't put that little letter back in an envelope and mail it in that says yes, you lose Medicaid for Eddie. That's the most common way that it's lost. They just simply don't renew it. Then the state passed a rule that says, okay, if you blow it for more than 30 days, you now have to reapply for Medicaid as if you never had it. Now, when you get it back, you don't get a new Medicaid number, you get the old number. So the truth is, you never really lost it. It was just simply pushed down out of your reach. So then you file a Medicaid application, and they inevitably say, no, you're not qualified for it. Your family income is too high. No, 3 words written on the application, disabled child only, makes the child's income the means of determining eligibility. How much does the 7-year-old make after all? He's well within the federal poverty limit, right? Okay, and that's why he qualifies as a family of 1 in 33 states. It's not a loophole. You may have heard about the loophole. What a terribly disparaging way to refer to a child who's impaired and is entitled under federal law to treatment funding. He's a loophole kid. That's what the state uses to refer to those children when their family makes a little bit more than the federal poverty level. I've worked with families in Gladwin. It's the most economically privileged place in the United States. You know, you drive up the driveway, there's the garage. It's got 6 cars, one of them's a Ferrari. Fabulous wealth. Child's got autism. That child is covered under EPSDT, just like the child living in some other awful, economically blighted place. You're not sure how the walls are held up, you know? And we go into those places, and I'll tell you, in my experience, the ones who treat my staff like gardeners without green cards, who expect to be, I don't know what they expect. They expect us to take over for them, fix their child, be a babysitter, be a confidant, whatever. Those are not the poor people.
Yeah.
Those are the people with resources. So on the screen you see two things. One is the CMS informational bulletin released on July 7th of 2014, which says in writing that EPSDT treatment funding is permissible for nonviolent children with autism spectrum disorders. You don't have to be dangerous to yourself or others to qualify for EPSDT funding for behavioral support. Now tell me how often I've confronted insurance companies who've said, no, this child doesn't qualify for TSS because they're not violent. That violates the CMS informational bulletin. It violates Dennis Marion's explicit directive to all of the MCOs. And if you don't know that, you're at risk of believing what they tell you.
Yeah, right.
And that's the bottom line. The advocates don't know this stuff. And why don't they know it? Because they're not tied in to the right places. And what do we know about knowledge? Knowledge is power. So the withholding of knowledge is the preservation of power elsewhere. And the second thing up on the screen is the CMS State Medicaid Directors letter dated December 15th of 2014 that was intended to inform state Medicaid agencies that Medicaid, not the school, is the payer of first resort for any covered services in a school. So if it's a Medicaid EPSDT funded service, you can't say that the school has to pay for it. You can't. How many times do the insurance companies say, well, that's the school's responsibility?
And it's called passing the buck till somebody gets too tired to continue to follow to the truth.
December 15th, 2014, in writing by the CMS. Make a copy of it, attach it to your documents when you send in. When I do administrative law judge hearings on behalf of the kids that my staff are working with, and the insurance company mentions school, that's my cue to say, I'm sorry, Your Honor, it's clear and it's well established in federal and state law that this hearing is to be discussing the mental health treatment needs of the child, not their school program. We can have our separate opinions about whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, and those opinions are irrelevant and should be excluded from this conversation. Do I have that right, Your Honor? And the answer is always, well, of course. And it just shuts the conversation down at that point, and you say, all right, I'll continue. She's got a medically necessary need for treatment. We have documented the successful delivery of a treatment program. It's not done yet. Can you please tell them where to sign the check? Each state makes its own definition of what is medically necessary treatment. Here's Pennsylvania's. You can tell that I've done this a few times.
I can tell you have 30 years back.
Any service, treatment, or whatever that prevents the worsening of a child's condition is medically necessary. Or if it treats the child's condition, or if it helps the child maintain functioning comparable to other children of the same age, it's medically necessary. Pick one. Wait, we put all three in the prescription. And this is why I'm saying Medicaid is the greatest treatment funding secret ever concealed. Because you as a child with a disability are not entitled to medical treatment funding unless you're enrolled in Medicaid, in which case you're entitled under federal and state law to funding until your treatment is not necessary anymore, or you turn 21, whichever happens first. That's the law. George Washington University did a study in the early 90s, and they looked at the medical necessity definition of all the states, and they said Pennsylvania's is almost word for word identical to the federal standard. So Pennsylvania is right up there. It nails prevention as the primary purpose, treatment, and all you have to do is say, here's the treatment, it's working, or maintenance of functioning. So any one of those three meets the standard for medical necessity.
That's in
Most other states implement the maintenance function, and the Health Law Project and the various other national advocacy organizations have said for years, just focus on number 3, maintenance. Now that's unfortunate, because prevention is the primary purpose of EPSDT funding. In writing, its primary purpose is prevention, right? Secondarily is treatment, and for that you want to use an evidence-based practice or practice-based evidence. I mean, sometimes the terms are mutually exchangeable. Applied behavior analysis, I said before, it's whatever you define it as. If you look at the names of the people who created applied behavior analysis in the 1960s, Bear, Wolf, and Risley, those are the guys who coined functional behavior assessment and applied behavior analysis. And what they're talking about is a process, not a thing, it's a process, where you're taking outcome data on a regular basis, and the data is used to inform the treatment process on an ongoing basis so that it keeps getting tuned up and made better and better, and you have a focus on socially significant changes. That's applied behavior analysis. And then there's the definition foisted in innumerable class action suits and other kinds of things where advocates got involved, and now somehow applied behavior analysis is teaching a kid how to dress himself. Stop. It's good that you can teach him how to dress himself, and you can do that, but you really have to write the treatment program in behavioral language that focuses on prevention of the deterioration, maintenance of functioning, and treatment of the behavioral condition that gives rise to the mental illness symptoms. That's what EPSDT pays for. What I'm going to show you now will actually go into BHRS the way I do it, and intensive behavioral health services the way I do it. This is a short model. A 31 is a physician. The most important thing about any professional is to realize that you need to deflate your head, right? And the more you get in the degree world, the more deflation you need to practice so that you don't hurt people. Good people exist in all walks of life, and so do bad people. Just getting a license doesn't make you good, you know, and frankly, keeping a license without ongoing training and supervision and rubbing elbows with other professionals makes you bad by definition. So you have to have a respect for ongoing learning and rubbing elbows with other professionals. You never just talk to the choir. So there's a model of how to do BHRS or IBHS, where you provide supervision to a group of people who themselves render supervision to other people with lesser credentials. Here's some outcome data. You see the vertical black line, that's when we drop TSS into these kids' lives. And you can see that in this case, they all got better to a greater or lesser extent. Those are statistically significant changes based on the data we're collecting. It was reviewed by 4 different educational institutions, more or less certified as being reliable and valid data about treatment outcomes. The short version of our research, back in 2012, we had a study that we released. The state ignored it. The state guy actually claimed that this didn't have a control group, so it was irrelevant. And you don't need a control group. The single subject with repeated measures, experimental design, the child is their own control group. That's statistics 101 that they didn't get with their doctoral degree. Somewhere they missed that piece. The bottom line is we came to the conclusion that you cannot drive attack with a toothpick. You have to have a treatment program that meets the need of the child. Don't drive it with a sledgehammer, that's not appropriate. But if you're going to try to drive it with a toothpick, you're going to fail, and that is going to violate the rights and entitlements, the civil rights, in fact, of the child who you're treating. This is the Kossor Scale. It comes in 2 parts, a frequency and a severity measure. I will go through this in the next minute, and we'll just so you'll understand. You see here it says a 3 or a 4. This is based on severity. How severe is the child's behavior? I'll read it here. The child's behavior is severe enough to worry you almost every time. That's a 3. To every single time. That's a 4. Behavior isn't responding to the usual interventions that work with typically developing children of the same approximate age who you know. Behavior requires outside help to manage or change. It is not obviously hurting the child or others, but if it persists, it will probably result in someone getting hurt or the child's failing to be successful in meeting life's challenges. You get it? It's a 3, not a 4. A 2 means normal for a kid at the same developmental age or tolerable. Let's look at a 5 or a 6. You characterize the child's behavior as very serious almost every time. That's a 5. To every single time. That's a 6. Outside help has been involved in the past and hasn't helped, or isn't consistently helping now, but there are more good days than bad days overall. You see how we're narrowly defining what's a 3, what's a 4, what's a 5, what's a 6? We'll go to 7. 7 is you characterize the child's behavior as alarmingly serious almost every time. That's a 7. To every single time, it's an 8. There are relatively more bad days than good days. So now it's not a 5 or a 6, it's in the 7 to 8 because the ratio has shifted. What's a 9? A 9 is, it's catastrophic because it's potentially life-threatening. A rating of 9 would mean that nobody died and the child's behavior did not appear to be intended as suicidal or homicidal, or an emergency room visit was necessary to treat a serious injury but did not result in a hospitalization. That's a 9. A 10 is they were hospitalized or somebody died. Okay, it's that stark. So I created a scale that you're either a 3 or a 4 or not, or a 5 or not, so you can find yourself in that continuum with an extremely high level of reliability. Which means if I ask you to rate it, you're going to come up with the same number you get, and everybody agrees. That's solid gold in the world of statistics. The next question is it valid? Does it measure what it purports to measure? And it certainly does. It's criterion referenced. It has to measure what it purports to measure. And let's look real quickly at the frequency. A 3 is a few times in the past week and almost every week in the past month. That's a 3. Or every single week in the past month. That's a 4. A 5 is many times in the past week and almost every week in the past month. That's a 5. To every single week. That's a 6. And a 7 is several times per day, with breaks in between incidents. Almost every day is a 7, and every single day is an 8. And again, you can't be a 7 if you're an 8 or a 9. You see what I mean? It's an interval scale. And when you take that data from a parent every single week and you plot it on this form, this becomes a movie, not a snapshot. And when you turn this movie into this picture, now you're actually handing something to the insurance company that says, look, he gets worse when there is new caregivers coming into the kid's life. This is when grandma came to stay with the family for a couple of weeks and all bets were off. And he knew it. It's not unusual, but once grandma goes home, behavior goes back down. And the bottom line is this number here is statistically significantly lower than the number at the start. You win. Is it below a 2? Not quite. Therefore, the treatment is not done yet, because 2 is normal for a child that age or tolerable for the family. Now, the family can say, hey, look, he's a 5, get out of our life. We're not going to do this anymore. Because honestly, if the family isn't collaborating with us, we can't do it all by ourselves. We can't. It's not legal. And when we don't get data reliably, validly reporting the child's status, in other words, if the parent says it's a 10, it's a 10, it's a 10, no, it's not a 10. It varies. Pieces of wood stay the same time after time. He's a growing child. He's going to go up and down. It's not a 10 every single week. So we're going to tell parents this is how we do behavioral treatment, and this is how you can get it funded for your child with a high degree of probability of success. Thank you for your attention, and there's more.